Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm 16 years old. I live with my twin sister, Janet, my little brother, and my grandma in an old house at the end of the street. The story I'm about to tell you might sound a bit like the spooky stories you hear on TV, but my story really happened. It all started when my parents passed away in a car accident on their way home one late Friday night. I heard from Grandma that they lost them on the spot even before emergency services arrived. But since that time about 2 months ago, my brother Phil, Janet, and I not only became orphans, but we also had to move from our house to our grandma's and change schools. Before my parents' accident, I had only ever seen my grandma, who is my mother's mom, once, when I was about 8 years old, and I was not sure whether my twin sister could remember her. My dad's parents lived on another continent, and they were too old to travel the distance for the funeral. Immediately, my parents were put in the ground, and without allowing us to say our goodbyes to our friends, Grandma came to take us to live with her. I remember the events that happened as if it were yesterday. Janet was standing beside me in front of our parents' graves when she came to us and introduced herself as our grandma. She told us that we would be living with her. Her appearance alone was enough to scare my little brother out of his wits. He held my hand tightly as soon as he saw her approach us. Her hair was braided with all kinds of beads, and I was sure the number of chains she wore on her neck and on both her hands and feet would weigh more than my little brother. Phil was only about 3.5 years old. She even tied a sash around her waist, and on her forehead was a beautiful but strange tribal design. I could not believe that the woman standing in front of us was the person we were going to live with. In fact, I hoped she wasn't, and it was all a big joke. I took one look at my sister, and I knew she felt the same way. If our family friends who knew our parents so well and the police hadn't confirmed who she was, we would never have gone with her. We would have thought that she was some crazy lady who was trying to kidnap us and maybe use us as slaves or sacrifices or something. Yes, she really was that creepy. The death of my parents was the most devastating thing that has ever happened to my brother, Janet, and me. But living with my grandma, changing schools, and having no friends around was almost worse. On getting to her house, the first thought that came to my mind after we entered the house was that my grandma definitely practiced witchcraft. Her house did not have any strange smell, thankfully. In fact, it actually smelled nice, but there were so many tribal symbols painted in different corners of her house, even on the doorstep. Also, the spooky way she dressed and looked, and the fact that she lived in a very old house, a tad too much away from the other houses closest to it, further convinced me that I was right. It was surprising, though, to find out how caring and sweet our grandma actually was. Aside from some of her really strange ways and her stories about the supernatural, she treated us so well that sometimes we forgot about the loss of our parents. She packed all of our things from our old house. All of them, even the things that were difficult to pack. Janet's whole library of books were brought to her house, and she told us that we didn't have to start school immediately since it was December, and the Christmas holiday was drawing near. We did many things with her, like watch movies, bake cookies, and some other cool stuff. Eventually, if I'm being honest, we grew to like her, but something strange usually happened that baffled us. Every morning when my twin sister and I woke up, we usually heard Grandma chanting and singing some strange songs in a language we didn't understand in her room before coming downstairs to meet us. We were able to hear her because her room was right next to ours. At breakfast one morning, I decided to ask her the meaning of her morning ritual and why she did it. She then went ahead to tell us how she could venture into the supernatural through dreams, and anytime she had a dream she was sure was going to happen, she chanted to clear the way for another the next day. Of course, both my twin sister and I found everything she told us to be ridiculous, so of course we asked her to prove it, and she said she would. The next time she had a dream after chanting and speaking strange words in her room, she came downstairs and told us what her dream was. After she was done telling it, my sister found it funny and burst into laughter, but I did not. My grandma had apparently dreamt of me breaking my leg before the day was over, but I knew that was never going to happen. I then thought, at least I now knew that Grandma's dreams were fake and she was not even close to the supernatural realm. Just to be on the safe side, I was extra careful every time I took a step, and I made sure not to run that day. I decided to stay indoors, for I had made up my mind to prove Grandma wrong. Janet watched me all day because she also wanted to see if Grandma's dream would come true. "Stop scaring me, Janet," I snapped when I couldn't take it anymore. You should be making sure I don't get hurt, not watching me expecting it to happen." Night came, and my legs were still in perfect condition. No slips, no falls, nothing. Throughout dinner, I had a smug look on my face because I could not wait to rub it in Grandma's face that all the chance had been for nothing. I took our plates to the kitchen and headed to my room to sleep. The day was practically over already, and I was right. On my way up the stairs, I got a message on my phone. As I looked at my phone to check it, I don't really know what happened. The next thing I noticed was an insane pain, and I found myself twisting and turning in agony on the floor. Apparently, I had broken my leg, and my grandma was already prepared for it. Until today, I still do not know how I slipped, but I did slip, and I had to wear a cast for ages. From that day onwards, every morning we would ask Grandma what her dream was the night before, and it would come true that day. Every single one of them. From things about the weather to things about our neighbors we were not supposed to know, the kinds of dreams she had were endless. They were always so accurate. Janet and I even started to think of how we could make money from telling people things they did not know but needed to know would happen. It was fun, until one day when Grandma had a dream, and it was not a fun one. She herself was shaking as she came downstairs before she told us. When she did, we started shaking too. She said she saw a hooded man dressed in black come into our house and attack us. Every dream Grandma had ever had come true, so we were all sure this would too. I immediately wanted us to call and inform the police, but both Janet and Grandma were against it because they were sure that the police would not believe us. We then all wondered what we would do to protect ourselves. I had tried it the first time Grandma had a dream about me and it didn't work, so that made it even scarier. If we left the house, he might wait for us to come back. So we all decided that the best thing to do was to get extra security for our house. That day, we changed the doors into stronger ones and doubled all the locks. We even put locks on every window, and just to be safe, we bought cameras and placed them around our house. Everything we bought was expensive, but the man was definitely coming because it was Grandma's dream, and we had to be prepared for his arrival. As soon as we finished installing all the precautions we bought, that evening, it started raining cats and dogs, and it refused to stop. We were all sure it was an ominous sign, especially since Grandma already said it rained heavily throughout in her dream. All three of us did not do anything but stare at the screen connected to the cameras for hours, while constantly checking up on Phil to make sure he was okay and asleep. We didn't want him to be the one to let the attacker in. You see, he was already smart enough to open the door, but he wasn't smart enough to know who to open it for. And we were all sure the man was coming. We didn't need to take any chances we could avoid. After waiting for a long time, we were all hungry and tired, and we started to doubt that the hooded man coming to attack us was ever going to show up. I even thought that maybe Grandma made a mistake, and the dream was not for today, but for tomorrow. I was tired and I wanted to go to sleep. Finally, we were all about to stop for the day when we saw the silhouette of a man approach our doorstep. Janet then started shouting, "He is hooded! He is hooded!" I immediately started dialing 911. But when the man pressed the doorbell, instead of trying to force his way in, I and everyone else was surprised. Why would someone coming to hurt us ring the doorbell? It was a trap, of course. The doors were so tightly secured, and he needed us to let him in so he could attack us. But what happened next shocked me. I was surprised when Janet, either because of bravery or because of utter stupidity, went close to the door and asked the person who he was. "Are you insane?" I thought. "What do you need his identity for? Just don't open the door, silly. You know he's here to attack us." And then the next thing was even more shocking. This time to all of us. It turned out that it was our neighbor, Mr. John, at the door. We asked him to remove his hood, and sure enough, it really was him. I was still skeptical about letting him in because all I could think about was how unlikely it was for me to break my leg the day Grandma had her dream, but it still happened anyway. We couldn't be too careful. My grandma and Janet, however, refused to leave the man outside in the cold. I kept on asking them to think, why was the man here today, of all days, and why did he come at this sort of hour, in the rain, and why, of all the coincidences, was he wearing a hood? My warnings fell on deaf ears, and eventually they let him in. I watched his every move from the moment he stepped in. We all walked backwards, ever so slightly, as he gradually came further into the house. He looked scary, all wet from the rain, and he had the biggest frown on his face. "Stop all the noises!" he shouted. He then looked at Grandma and said, "You're a creepy old lady. The weird noises you force me to listen to every day are giving me the chills." He then rushed away in a hurry. As soon as he left, we looked at each other and we burst into laughter. We were so scared that we didn't even notice how weird we were behaving around the neighbors. Nothing happened that day and no one attacked us. When I asked Grandma why her dream did not come true, she laughed and said maybe she really did not go into the supernatural realm this time and it really was just an ordinary dream. But I was thankful that it wasn't supernatural because even though Grandma's dreams have continued to come true after that incident, if that one had come true, it probably wouldn't be a funny story at all. Have you ever gone through a creepy experience like this? Tell us about it in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.